Gedavach. Okay, so the first thing I want to announce is that today's broadcast is sponsored by David Zolti. The Ilu Nishmas is Shver, whose boy by Yom Yortzeit was today, and his name was Reb Chaim Meir ben Reb Yehuda Aryeh Pantel. He's a Shomer should have an Aliyah, and he should be a Melech Yosher for the whole family and for Klal Yisrael. Today's broadcast is also being sponsored by Duvi Menzelevsky, Ilu Nishmas' father, whose boy by Yom Yortzeit is today, and his name was Reuven ben Eliezer. Today is also the boy of Cantor Yosy Rosenblatt. Yeah. And the end of tomorrow's daf actually talks about a chazan who Rova complained about his nusach, and I guess it was appropriate for a chazan. Okay, so let's get started. If I'm not mistaken, we left off on Erev Shabbos by the Evan Shasiya. I just want to point out a mistake that I made on Friday, as well as a difficulty that I ran into and how to resolve it, or how someone thought to resolve it. So the mistake that I made was in the brisa that we learned on Nun Daled Amud Aleph, that was listing off the 13 pareichesin that existed in the Beis HaMikdash. I thought that this was talking about the first Beis HaMikdash, but it's not. It's talking about the second Beis HaMikdash. And it says that there were two pareichesin in the Dvir, which are the two pareichesin that our mission discusses that are between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. And connected that, there are two pareichesin in the attic, between the attic of the Kodesh and the attic of the Kodesh Kodeshim. The problem is the Gemara is trying to bring a raya from here that there was a pareiches in the opening, in the wall, in the Amatraxin, that existed in the first Beis HaMikdash. Yet it's bringing a brisa referring to the second Beis HaMikdash. So Rashi tells us what the raya is. I don't have it 100% clear, but if anybody can help me with it, I'd appreciate it. So when Rashi goes through explaining where all the pareichesin is, and he fears us, v'chihechi de b'mikdash sheni hoyu pareichos, plural, keneged apsachim, by every single door, hachanami b'mikdash rishon, every doorway must have had a pareichos. So that's all the Gemara is trying to prove from this brisa. This brisa is not talking about the Beis HaMikdash rishon. It's just telling us that every single doorway had a pareiches, and therefore it's logical to say that in the first Beis HaMikdash there was a pareiches in that doorway between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim, and it's that pareiches that the two badim poked through on and made it look like a woman's breasts looking from the Heichal. The question that came up was, we know that the Amma Traxin, the Amma that was the footprint of that wall in between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim was a status of Suffolk. We didn't know if that was Kodesh or Kodesh Kodashim. But if the two badim were sticking into that area, doesn't that mean that they were partially out of the Kodesh Kodashim? So how is it that the two badim of the Aron, which are supposed to be in the Kodesh Kodashim, are pushing through the pareiches, which would mean that they're out of the area that we know is exclusively the Kodesh Kodashim? So someone suggested that since the pareiches was there, that barrier, anything inside that barrier, still had a status of Kodesh Kodashim. So those two areas where the pareiches pushed out the pareiches, it allowed it to claim that space as space of the Kodesh Kodashim. So you wouldn't take the demarcation point and draw a line straight up, and anything to the west would be Kodesh Kodashim, and anything to the east would be Heichal. Rather, the contours of the curtain would actually bend to allow anything inside it to be Kodesh Kodashim. Those are just two thoughts that I didn't realize before, that I learned over Shabbos. Compliments of Chaim Tzvi Margulis, who says here in the Chavrishas, I always double check my information with him to make sure that we're not missing anything. Okay.
There was no suffix. I thought there was no suffix in the. I thought there was no suffix in the first Beis Mikdash.
There was. Tosfos says beferish that there was a suffix in the first Beis Mikdash, and Tosfos asks if that's the case, how did they know where to place that wall? And Tosfos says it was Min Hashem that they Min Hashemayim. They had the pasuk said make a wall here, but in fact the status of the footprint of that wall was a suffix from day one.
And that was a real wall.
And that was a real wall.
But there was still a parochas.
In the opening, in the doorway of that wall, there was a parechus.
It's the parechus. Okay.
And that's the parechus that our Gemara was talking about, that the two badim pushed out. Okay, Gavaltik. So let's see the Evan Shasia. I'm going to read the words of this Gemara, but honestly, I have no clue what I'm talking about. But we'll read the Gemara. Zok to Heilige Gemara. Tana Ushasiya Haishan Kras. The Evan Shasia was called Evan Shasia. Tana, we learned Shemimena Hushasas Ha'olam. From there, the world was founded. Tanan, and that of course was in Yerushalayim. Tanan, we learned a Mishnah that supports this. Command Omar Mitzion Nivra Ha'olam. Or it's a brisa. We learned a brisa that will support, at least one sheet in the brisa will support this position that from Yerushalayim is where the world started from. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Olam me'em te'isay nivra. The world was created from its center. Shenemar, b'tzekes offer lemutza. When Hashem poured the earth to be the foundation of the world, uregovim yuduvku, and mud collected around that central point and grew into the world. I'm not sure. I don't know. I never finished my course in universe civil engineering, so I don't know exactly how this worked. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Olam Natztada Nivra. The world was created from the four sides, and then from the four sides it moved in. Again, a universe is three-dimensional, so I don't know exactly where these four sides are. Shenamar, it says, Kila Sheleg Yoyemer Havi Eretz. Hashem told the snow to become ground, to become earth. The Geshem Otter and standard rain, the Geshem Mitrus Uzai, and strong rains are going to be what created the world. And Rashi says the rains and the snow from all the four corners of the world started to expand until they joined together in the center. Once again, I don't even know where to begin with this. Rabbi Nafcha Amar, Even Yora Kadosh Baruch Hu b'Yam. Hashem threw a rock into the Yam. I mean, who made the Yam? Hashem must have made the Yam first. I'm not sure that works, but it threw a rock into the Yam. And from there the world got founded. Shenemar al ma'adana hatu. On what were the foundations of the world planted? Oy mi yora even pinasa, or who threw the rock of the foundation stone, the cornerstone. Again, I don't understand what these things mean. I don't know if a human can understand it. Which supports our Mishnah that the Bria Sa'olim started in Tzion in the Beis Hamikdash from the Evan Hashasiyah. Shenemar Mizmer la'asaf Kele Lakim Hashem. And later in the same capital it says, Vaymer Mitzion Michlal Yofi. And we learn Mimenu from Tzion, Muchlal Yofla Shaloilam is spread the beauty of the world. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer God Loimer, Ela Toldos Hashemayim Va'aretz B'Hibaram, V'Yom Asois Hashem Alakim, Eretz V'Shemoyim. So Rabbi Eliezer Gadol darshans from this pasuk, Toldos Shemayim V'Shemayim Nivru. All of the celestial beings, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, were all created from the Shemayim. Toldos Haaretz, and anything that grows from the ground, people, animals, plants, everything, Me'aretz Nivru, were created from the earth. And the Chacham says, Elu va'elu mitzion nivru. Everything was created from Tzion, once again supporting our Mishnah. Shenemar mizmer la'asaf kele lakim Hashem, diber va'yikra aretz, mimir zech shemesh ad nuvayai, va'omer mitzion michal yofi, lakim afia. And we learn, mimenu muchal yofi shalaylam. Again, if anybody saw anything that gives some insight into what all this means, I'd love if you shared it, because I couldn't find anything on it. Zok tehel Gemara. Not all, as David, do you have a Steinsaltz Gemara with you? Does he say anything? Okay. Not all as Adam, no pressure. Not less Adam, Yimisham Amaris. So what happened? The Kohen Gadol finished with the Keteris, Lefnai v'Lefnim. He came out to the Heichal, and then he went to the entrance of the Heichal, and he took the blood of the par that was being held by a Kohen who was mixing it, and he took it, and he went into the base Kodesh HaKodeshim with it, and he spritzed Achas L'maylo V'Shem L'mato, and the Mishnah tells us he wasn't Mechaven up or down, Ela Kamatzlif, and we learned it like in order, like when you put on your tefillin, you have the 7 lines from your 7 bands, so like when someone gets Malchus, you see the lines on his back. So Mochi Rabbi Yehuda showed to demonstrate what this looked like, and he said it was ke me nagdina. It looks like someone who was whipped. They would start from his upper shoulders and slowly move down his back. So there was a series of lines. So that's what the intention was when he spritzed. There'd be one drop behind the other drop, as if lined up one beneath the other. So now the question is, where did he spritz? Did he actually spritz on the kaparis on the top of the aron itself, or did it just fall on the floor? Zok the Heilige Gemara, Tana we learned in the Brisa, Keshumaza, when the kohen spritzed, Einamaz ala kaparis, he didn't actually spritz that dam should be on top of the kaparis. Ela keneged uvya shel kaparis. So Rashi says, Einamaz al kaparis al gaga, he didn't have the dam drip on the top of the kaparis. Ela keneged uvya. He spritzed it opposite the thickness of the kaparis, or the height of the kaparis, but no blood touched the aron at all. All the blood fell on the floor. He was just spritzing in the direction of the aron. When he's spritzing up, anybody who plays softball knows that you pitch underhanded. So when he was spritzing lamaila, he did it underhanded. When he was spritzing down, he did an overhand. How do we know that the dam did not touch the aron at all? We're just discussing directions when we're looking at when we're talking about the kapiros in the front of the kapiros. It's all directions, but really all of the dam fell on the floor. Where do we know this from? So before we go weiter, we need to get a little bit of clarity into the psuk. The Gemara is going to spend the entire daf, actually Amud, discussing two psukim, the pasuk that discusses the spritzing the dam of the par, and the pasuk that discusses spritzing the dam of the seir. And neither pasuk provides all of the necessary information as to how this rika was done. So we're going to get some information from the pasuk that's talking about the dam of the par. We're going to get some of the information that's talking about spritzing the dam of the seir, and then we're going to import and export and share the information from the psukim about the pasuk about the seir and the pasuk about the par. So let's just quickly look at the psukim over here so that we could review them, and then the Gemara will become very simple and easy to understand. So it says over here, the lokach in pasuk Yudalit. It's Nachem, I think it's prepared to sign pasuk Yudalit. It says v'lokach midam hapar. You should take from the par. He's going to spritz onto the face of the kaparis, and that was the achas l'mayla. But it doesn't say achas; it just says he spritzed. The pasuk doesn't indicate how many zrikas he makes. We know it's achas l'mayla from our Mishnah, but the pasuk is very unclear. But l'fnei kaparis, the sheva l'mata, the Torah lists off quite explicitly yaze sheva pa'omim min adam betzboy. Now, it's interesting to note that this word yas is an extra word, because it could have said v'logach midam apar, v'hizo v'etzboy al pnei kapar is kedma, v'lefnei kapar is sheva pam midam betzboy. We know we're talking about hazah. So the Gemara is going to discuss this extra word of yas and what it teaches us. And the Gemara is also going to point out that the pasuk of par does not tell us how many zrikas were done towards the top, but it does itemize that it's sheva lamata. Now let's look at how the Torah describes the seir. The shachar seir chatas asher la'am. The heaviest dama am beis laparachas. The also as dama kasher asla dama par. You follow the same regimen as you did with the par, and then it says v'hiza oisoi alakaparis. Oisoi means singular. So by the seir, the Torah does say specifically that it was only achas l'mayla. But v'lefnei kaparis, when the Torah talks about the sheva lamata, by the kaparis, it doesn't say an amount. So we know achas l'mayla is clear by the seir, and sheva lamata is clear by the par. We need to figure out how to import the information, how to share that information between the par and the seir, and we also need to know what is this extra word yazeh. And now the Gemara goes through these psukim, and that's how we get our maskana. So zok the heilige Gemara. How do we know that it didn't touch the aron? How do we know that the dam was spritzed on the floor and it didn't touch the aron? Zog the Gemara, Amar Bacha Bar Yaakov, Amar Bzeir, Amar Kra. It says, V'hiza oisoi ala kaparis u'lefnei kaparis. This is the pasuk by the Seir. Lo yoymar lemata b'Seir. It didn't have to say v'lefnei kaparis by the Seir. The lo tzarich. It didn't need to tell me at all that you spritz lemata by the Seir. Why? The gomar mimata the par. We learn from the par where it says specifically you spritz seva lemata. So lama nemar. Why b'chalal did I need the pasuk even to say v'lefnei kaparis by the Seir? Zot Gemara, the lefnei kaparis by Seir is completely extra, and it's there to teach us what the halacha is by the al. So it's lakushe al lefnei, to tell us that the same halacha you find by the lefnei kaparis, which you do it on the floor, so too when the pasuk says earlier that you spritz ala kaparis, it doesn't literally mean you spritz it on the kaparis. It also means you spritz it on the floor, but your direction when you shoot it, when you spray it, is up. And we learned malefnei, the lav al, just like when it says of lefnei kaparis, it doesn't mean you're spritzing it on the kaparis, it means you're spritzing it on the floor. Af al, the lav al. So too, when it says you spritz on the kaparis, it doesn't really mean that you spritz on the kaparis. Very simple, because the lefnei kaparis is extra in the pasuk of Seir, so we use it to teach us that the zrikas are never on the actual kaparis. It just means in that direction, but the zrikas are on the floor. Fact Gemara, Adarabba, you say that the lefnei kaparis by Seir is extra. Well, guess what? The ala kaparis by par is also extra. Lo yomer l'mayla b'par. It should have never said ala kaparis by par. The lo tzarich, you don't need it. The gomar mimayla de seir, because you learn about the one zrika of achas l'mayla by par. It doesn't say. You learn it from seir, and the Gemara is going to bring a brisa later on that goes exactly through the limudim. But at the end of the day, the achas l'mayla by par we only learn from seir. So why does it say ala kaparis by par at all? Lama nemar. So maybe the ala kaparis teaches us what's pshat in the lefnei kaparis. Lakusha lefnei la'al. Instead of learning from lefnei kaparis and teach the al, maybe learn from al and teach the lefnei and say ma al mamish. Just like when it says on the kaparis, it means you literally spritz it on the kaparis. That's the pasuk, the pshat of al. Af lefnei. So too when it says lefnei kaparis, al mamish, maybe it means it has to hit the front face of the kaparis. The kaparis was a relatively thick gold cover, and maybe it means it has to actually hit that front face of the kaparis. So you have a choice. We have an extra al by par, and you have an extra lefnei by seir. Or to be clear, you have an extra lamata. You have an extra lamata by seir, and you have an extra lamaila by par. Which one do you use? Zokmer haimai. I amit bishlema lamata desir lakushe. If I go like my original assumption that we say that the lefnei kaparis by seir is extra, and since that means on the floor, so too the al would mean on the floor, that would be good. You know why? Because the lamaila of par, the extra ala kaparis mentioned by par, we can use it, we can apply it to teach us something else that we would have otherwise not known. The Tana Devei Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Tana Devei Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, al penei kaparis kedma, towards the mizrach. Ze bonaav, it's a binyav that kol makom shenemar penei. Anytime the Torah uses the word penei, ein elakadim, it always means mizrach. So since we have something to do with the extra al penei kaparis by par, so then let's use the extra word that we have by seir to teach us the limud. If you want to use the lamayla b'far lakusha, which will teach us, in fact, that the zrikas are on the actual aron, well then lamata desir lamayasa. We will have no limud. We will have nothing to do with the extra v'lefnei kaparis by seir. So since we could occupy the al of par, and we don't have any option to occupy the lefnei of seir, let's use the lefnei of seir to tell us that you never spritzing on the aron itself; it's only on the floor. And and the al by the par we use for a separate limit to teach us that al always means mizrach. The Meiri asks, so where would this be relevant? A halacha of al referring to the mizrach direction. So the Meiri brings a pasuk that tells you that you're not allowed to enter the kodesh kodeshim. It says b'zoy shavi ayin al kodesh. Only with the ketars you're not allowed to go, and there's an iser to go into the kodesh kodeshim. I think there's an iser misa. The kohen dies if he goes into the kodesh kodeshim he's not supposed to. But it says over there pnei. So we learn that there's only a chiv misa, and we had this earlier. There's only a chiv misa if you go into the kodesh kodeshim through the right direction, going from mizrach to ma'ariv, headed in through the front door. But what if you only go into the kodeshim through some other door? For instance, you drop down from the attic. That would not be considered an unauthorized entry. That would lead to a chiv misa. So that's what the Meiri suggests is one of the applications of the fact that Pnei always means Mizrach. But at the end of the day,
that's how they clean the Kodesh Kodshim.
Can you please say that again?
They had to clean the Kodesh Kodshim from the blood on the floor.
No, that was an authorized entry. Yeah. But even if someone went in not to clean, just to check it out, that wouldn't lead to a Chiyav Misa if he didn't come in the front door. So now we know that all of the Zrikas were not actually on the Ard itself, it was in the direction of the Ard. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get into the limudim of how you see the Sheva of Lamata by par that we apply to the seer, and the Achas Lamaila that you see by the seer that you apply to the par. So Tanu Rabbanan, very simple Gemara. That is the pasuk by the seir. Lamadnu we learn kama lamaila b'seir. We know how many zrikas are lamaila. Achas, one, because vehiza oisoi is a singular tense. But lamata b'seir, how many zrikas are done towards the floor, down, and yedea kama, because the pasuk by seir doesn't say. It just says you spritz v'lefnei kaparis, but it doesn't say how many. Hareni done. So let's look where we could figure this out from. Nemru damim lamata b'par. It says damim lamata by par, and it says v'nemru damim lamata b'seir, which is unclear how many there are. Ma lamata b'par, it's clear sheva, because the Torah specifically says by the par there's 7 zrikas lamata. Af lamata b'seir sheva. So let's say that lamata b'seir is sheva as well. That's one option. Learn the zrika of lamata by seir from the zrika of lamata by par. Maybe take a different perspective. Namru damam l'mayla by seir. By seir, the pasuk talks about spritzing l'mayla. V'namru damam l'mata b'seir, and the pasuk talks about spritzing dam l'mata by seir. Mala mayla b'seir achas, af l'mata b'seir achas. Just like this rika l'mayla, the Torah specifically says oisoi. It's one zrika, so maybe that should be parallel to the zrika l'mata. Should also be only one. Zoktamar near l'midoim. Let's see. The Zrika by the Seir of Lamata, what is it more similar to? Done in Mata Mimata. Let's learn the Zrika Lamata from the Zrika Lamata par, because they're both the same directional Zrika towards the bottom. They ain't done in Mata Milamaila. Why would I learn up the Zrika of spritzing down from the Zrika of spritzing up? So Kamar Adarabba, you have a different perspective. Done in Gufa Migufai. Why would you want to learn Seir from par, learn Seir from Seir? They ain't done in Gufa Me Alma. Don't learn seir from par. So since it's not clear in which direction to go, Talmud Leimer, we have the pasuk that tells us specifically what to do. It says v'asas damay kashrasol damapar. So the pasuk is telling you copy what you do by the par. Shein Talmud Leimer kashrasol. This whole sentence is not necessary. Uma Talmud Leimer kashrasol. Why do you have this whole sentence telling us compare the seir to the par? It sheyu kolas yosef shavais. So all of the zrikas by the seir should be equal to the zrikas of the par. Keshem shalamata b'par sheva, kach lamata b'seir sheva. Just like when you spritz lamata by this par, the Torah specifically says that 7 zrikas. So too, when the Torah says spritz down by the seir, it means 7 as well. Lamadnu kama lamata b'par. We know that it's 7 zrikas towards the floor by par, and we also know v'seir sheva. And we also know, but it's here lamato sheva, because we just said you learn it from par. But lamaila b'par, how many zrikas by the par you spritz up in Yidei Kama? I still know the amount. Varenu Dan, and I could learn it as follows. And this is similar to what we said a moment ago. Namru Damam Lamayla Basir, the Namru Damam Lamayla Bapar, Malamayla Basir Achas, just like the Damam Lamayla Basir is one, because there's Oisoi, Afal Mayla Bapar Achas, Oy Kalach Dersu, or instead of learning it out from Seer, maybe learn par from par. Namru Damam Lamata Bapar, and Namru Damam Lamayla Bapar. Malamata Bapar Sheva, Afal Mayla Bapar Sheva, just like it's defined when you spritz down, it's 7. Maybe when you spritz up, it's 7 as well. So what is the most logical thing to compare the Zrika Lamaila by par? Done in Maila Maila. Let's learn the Zrika Lamaila of par from the Zrika Lamaila of Seir, which will tell us that it's only 1. They done in Maila Mimata. Why would we learn Zrikas that are up from Zrikas that are down? So done in Gufa Migufa, then done in Gufa Me'alma. Why learn par from Seir? Learn par from par. Talmud Loimer, but also as Damoy Kasher also. Shane Talmud Loimer. I don't need the pasuk to tell you Kasher also the whole phrase that do exactly by the seer as you did by the par. Ma Talmud Loimer Kasher also. Shukolas Yosy Shavos. Keshem Shalamata B'Par Sheva. Kach Lamata B'Sir Sheva. Uchashem Shalamayla B'Sir Achas. Kach Lamayla B'Par Achas. So now we've got clear that it's Achas Lamayla B'Sheva Lamata, both by the par and by the seir. Now, if you remember, that answers all of our questions. But I still mentioned that there was an extra yazeh in the pasuk of par that we still have to account for, that the Gemara will account for in a moment. But I heard of Vosepis there's 1 lamayla and sheva lamata. So Rabbi Elvin said 2 possible svarish from 2 different mefarshim, and I don't remember the names. One he said is the achas lamayla goes connected the yeshatov. The yeshatov has a single strategy. The sheva lamata is going connected the yetzer hara. And the Yetzer Hara comes at you from all sides and from all directions. So you need protection everywhere. You need a machine gun fire all around you. You can't just have a single sniper. So that's why it's that way. And another pshat I heard is Achas Lamayla means, when we go up to Shemayim, we're not going to know anything. We're not going to know where the grocery store is. We're not going to know where the coffee room is. We're totally lost. We don't know much about the Shemayim. Their Rebbeinu Shalom has everything under control. But do we understand what's going on there? Absolutely not. Down in this world, we know our way around. So that's why it's Achas Lamayla, because we don't know any details, but Sheva Lamata, we know the details. In other words, we have to realize when the Rebbeinu Shalom does things, we have to be makabel, because we don't know how the Rebbeinu Shalom's cheshbonos work. And there was a famous story with the Tasha Rebbe, a beautiful story, is a Yid came to him crying about all the tzaros that he was having, and he was crying and complaining and saying, I need a yeshua, and it's terrible, we got to change things. So the Tasha Rebbe says, he was sitting across the table, he says, come, I want you to sit right near me. So the Yid comes around the table and sits right near the Tasha Rebbe. And everybody knows these older Rebbes, when they drink tea, they're nuclear power teas. They're so hot that they burst into flame upon contact, boiling hot. And the Tasha Rebbe, as he talked to Yid, spills some of this boiling hot tea on the guy's pants. Like at first he jumps, but then he doesn't say anything. If you're talking to the Rebbe and he spills on you, you're not going to say anything. And then he did it again the 3rd time. So 3 or 4 times he spilled this boiling hot tea on. He didn't say a word. Finally, he finishes up and he wishes the Yid, gives him a bracha, and he's leaving. As the guy is leaving his office, the Tasha Rebbe tells him, Rebbe Yankel, aren't you concerned why I spilled tea on you? Don't you want to understand the happened I spilled tea? He says, no, I have no kashas on the Rebbe. I know if the Rebbe spilled tea, he probably had cheshbonos, to oif, b'skulis, and yeshuas, and hamtaka satinim. So he says, look at you. Me, a little old Tasha Rebbe, spills tea, you go make terutzim, and it's all perfect, all cheshbonos. But the Rebbeinu Shalom, when he's doing things, you can't get around it, you can't accept it, you don't understand the cheshbonos. If the little Tasha Rebbe could spill tea for a reason, for sure you don't have to ask any kashas on the Rebbeinu Shalom that he does. So that was a geshmaka practical chassidus shemaisa from the Tasha Rebbe. When the Rebbeinu Shalom does something, we don't always have to understand it. If the Rebbe would do it, we wouldn't have a kasha. So tell the more about Achas.
It's a nice story.
I'm sorry?
I said it's a nice story.
Yeah.
Aber Lamaisa, as bei jedem quetscht, darf man sehen zu machen, it's a geringer.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Rebbe did. But the Rebbe also wanted to wake him up to the fact that that's not the answer you want to hear when you go to a Rebbe. You want him to zukzi.
That's right. That's right. You want him to see.
So maybe the Rebbe, by getting the fellow to realize obviously that was the way to get the yeshiva. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Someone told me a story with the Satmar Rebbe. There's a famous story with the Ger Rebbe. Someone went to Ger Rebbe and said, Rebbe, ich will sich getten. So without skipping a beat, the Ger Rebbe answered, and there nicht. So the story with the Satmar Rebbe is this guy goes to the Satmar Rebbe and he cries to the Satmar Rebbe, my wife doesn't do anything. She mamish doesn't do anything all day. It's terrible. So the Rebbe says, "Was willst du von ihr?" No women do anything. Women don't do anything. They sit around and do nothing a whole day. He says, Rebbe, all my friends tell me how their wife does this and the wife does that. He says, yeah, they lie. You should lie too. Okay, talk to Helig more about it.
The Satmar Rebbe was a pragmatist. He was a...
That's right. That's right. Dr. Phillipson wrote he writes a weekly thing on the Parsha. So he was talking about how when you contemplate your Rebbeinu Shalom, it should give you a tzitr. So there was a story where they found some shul. I don't know if it was a frum shul, could be it was a non-frum shul, and they found in it a Sefer Torah. And it was a beautifully written Sefer Torah, and they wanted to know if it's kosher. So the Satmar Rebbe showed the Sefer Torah to a Sefer, and the Sefer said, it's impossible that this is a kosher Sefer Torah. Why? Because whenever you look at the Ksav of a Sefer Torah, written by an Elcha Sefer, you'll always notice that all of the shemus of the Rebbeinu Shalom are not written as perfectly as the rest of the words, because there's a special tzitr that the Seifrim have, the Yerei Shemayim have, that you can see the text isn't exactly the same. But this Sefer Torah, the Yud Kei Vav Keis are as perfect and as straight as the rest of the words, which means it wasn't written with the proper kavanas. And in fact, they found out after that it was written by a Machal Shabbos. Again, it wasn't Ruach HaKodesh, it was a practical analysis of the words. So let's see the more achas, v'achas, achas shtayim. Taner Rabban. Achas, v'achas, achas shtayim. Achas v'sholos, achas v'arba, achas v'chamish, achas shish, achas v'sheva. So I know if I want to say the number 23 in English, I say 23. How do you say 23 in Yiddish?
23.
23. So you say the drei first and then the 20. But in English, you say the 20 first and then the 3. So Zok the Bryce over here, it's achas v'sheish, achas v'sheva. Divrei Reb Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it's the other way. Achas v'achas, shtayim v'achas, sholosh v'achas, arba v'achas, chamish v'achas, sheish v'achas, sheva v'achas. V'loi plig, it's not a machlokes. Mark Yasrei. If the Kohen Gadol came from Ingrid, he spoke this way. And if he came from Poland, he spoke that way. It was just, it didn't make a halachic difference. It was just the way people would list numbers. However, the Chul Alma, what everybody agrees, Mia Hazori Shoina Tricha Minin in Kol Achas V'achas. Between each Hazor Lamata, you say Achas again, referring to the ones Rika Lamaila. My timer. Why can't you say Achas? Achas, Shtayim, Sholoi Sheva. Why do I have to stick in an Achas in between each of my count? If anybody heard a good speaker, he doesn't say he doesn't stutter. But a bad speaker, as he's gathering his thoughts, he's saying to stall for a time so he can get clarity. So why do you have to say this achas in between? You need to give him time to think in between the azos. So instead of him saying let him say achas. And look what Rashi says. Shalo yita, shihele shos bein time. He should have some time in between each of his rikos. Losses liboy leminion to focus on the count. Shalo yita. Which is interesting, because I would think if I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll be easier for me to remember where I'm holding in my count than if I said 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. But vice versa, the fact that you have a moment to pause in between each of these rikas helps you stay focused on what number you're up to. That's the first prat as to why you do it. The second prat is Rabbi Yechon Amar Kra, v'lefnei kaparis yaza. Remember I mentioned to you that word yaza is extra? Now we're going to see why it's there. It doesn't need to say yaza. We know we're talking about spritzing blood. Yaza limed al hazari shoina shutricha minyan im kol achas v'achas. That you count the first hazar with every one of the 7 hazaris lamata. My b'nai, what's the difference if the reason why you have to say achas v'achas is because not to get mixed up, or it's because of the pasuk? So it's more simple. Iki b'nayu the loy mona v'loy ta. What if you didn't count achas, achas, vachas, but you didn't make a mistake? If the whole reason why you do it is to avoid a mistake, like a beloser, then there's no problem because you didn't make a mistake anyway. But if there's a xeris, a cause of a pasuk telling you that you have to count the achas, then you wouldn't be mekayim dazol properly. Zok the Gemara weiter. Yoto v'hinichoy al kenazav shebehechel. There was a machlokes in our Mishnah how many stands in the hechel there were. So after the kohen gadol came out of the kodesh hakodeshim after having spritzed the blood of the par, he puts it on a stand, and then he takes the blood of the seir. He shechs the seir, takes the blood of the seir, he spritzes it, and the Mishnah has a discrepancy, a machlokes, if after he spritzed the dam of the seir, would he place it into its own individual stand and then reach for the blood of the par that was sitting in the other stands from before? Was that the way it was done? Rabbi Yehuda said no. There was only one stand, and therefore, when he came with the blood of the seir, he first had to take the blood of the par out of the single stand and then place the blood of the seir into it, because there was only one stand. So we have a machlokes if there was one stand or two stand. You understand? Zok the Heilige Gemara. It's not awesome. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, loy hayu shofros lekenei chayva. Now we know, we learned in Maseches Shkolim, and we're going to review it here, that there were a whole bunch of pushkes. There were actually 13 pushkes lined up in the Beis Hamikdash where people could put money for different reasons, and we're going to see on Amud Beis what the different reasons were. However, Rabbi Yehuda held that when a woman was mechuyev to bring a set of birds, echad la'oilav, echad lachatos, such as a yoledes or a zov, there were many situations where you had to bring a set of birds. One was noila, one was a chatos. So we learned in Shkolm that there was a pushka that you put them into. Now you needed to buy with each person's money an oil and a chatos. So they would package their money together. Let's say it was 8 zuzim, 4 zuz per bird. They would wrap it together in a bundle, and then it would be a whole bunch of bundles with 8 zuz in them. And then the kohanim would take out each bundle and buy an oila and a chatos with the bundle, and would be makrabit for whomever it was to be for. But you didn't have to be there to bring him the birds. Like if you brought a carbon chatos, you couldn't just do that. You had to bring the animal, you had to say vidu, you had to make smicha. So you actually had to come to the Beis Hamikdash with your animal. But for the birds, there are those who hold you just put it into a pushka and they took care of it on their own. However, Yehuda argued, and he said, no, the same way you bring a carbon chatos by yourself, you have to bring it to the kohen. So too, with the kinei chayva, you needed to come with the birds to the kohen and watch him do it. You couldn't just drop it into a pushka and assume that it was taken care of. We had other shittas as well as they did. But Rabbi Yehuda said that they didn't have shofars for kinei chayva. Why not? Because they can get mixed up. What does that mean? They can get mixed up. My mipnei taruvos. Rabbi Yosef mipnei taruvos chayva b'nedava. There was a pushka. There were 2 pushkas actually for birds that would be donated as a nedava, an oilas nedava. If people wanted to give an oilas nedava of a bird, they would put some money in a pushka that was designated for oilas nedava. We're afraid the coin would get mixed up, and by mistake he would use the oilas nedava box and bring chatos and oilas with it, and maybe the box that was for chiyuv, for oila and chatos, they would bring only oilas nedava from, and then everybody would get messed up. So because he was concerned about the kohanim mixing up these 2 containers, he said, let's not have kinei chayva at all. So Tosfos asks, maybe to avoid the mix-up, eliminate the kanei nedava. Why eliminate the kanei chayva? Eliminate the kanei nedava. So let's see what Tosfos says. The Tosfos says, Ein lahakshos loimer ibcha, lo hayu shofers l'nedava. If you're worried about mix-up, so eliminate the nedava and they'll all be chayva. First of all, there's a lot more people bringing nedavas, so it backs up. So you need to have a pushka where you can pile them up, and then as the kohanim have time, they can be marked them. But the kanei chayva don't pile up, so it's easier to let them bring it on the spot. Because if they made the nedavas to be brought on the spot, there would be people lined up around the block waiting for days. So therefore, they made it easier. You can just drop the money off. That's one reason. There were many days that were very busy in the Beis Hamikdash with karbanis, so they wouldn't even be makriv karbanis nedava because the Beis Hamikdash was too busy. So because of that, what are you going to have people wait there for weeks? And therefore they have to watch the Mois and Nadava. That's why they needed a pushkit so they could keep the money there until the Beis Hamikdash needed it. The Karbonos Chayva, when someone brought it, the Kohanim had to do it that day. And that's why if there's a conflict between the Oilus Nadava and the Kinei Chayva, we'll say make the pushka for the Kinei of the Oilus Nadava and don't have a pushka for the Kinei Chayva. So Zok Gemara, Amar Le Abaye, what is the problem? They're going to get mixed up. But the Avid tray have one pushka for Chayv, one pushka for Nadava, and put a label on them. If you label them, why would the Kohen get mixed up? He'll know that if you take anything from the label box, from the Nadava box, it's Nadava, and if you take it from the Chayv box, it's a Chayv. Zok Gemara, because Rabbi Yehuda, Leslie, Kesiva, he holds you don't label things. Rashi says, why don't you label things? You cannot rely on a label. Some people, men, don't read instructions. First, they try to put whatever it is together. They go to IKEA, they try to put it together, and when nothing works, then they say, okay, maybe I should look at instructions. So since men never look at instructions, Rabbi Yehuda says, don't even bother with the instructions. You have to just make it idiot-proof, and then we know there'll be no mix-up. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said there weren't two receptacles, one for the dam of the par and one for the dam of Sawyer. Rather, there was only one receptacle, and you could only put in one at a time. Trey my time alloy. Why is it that Rabbi Yehuda held you can't have a separate receptacle for the par and a separate receptacle for the seir? Mishum de michalfi, because he might mix up and take the wrong blood. When he needs the dam of par, he might take the dam of seir. And when he needs the dam of seir, he might take the dam of par. You could ask Rabbi Yehuda, the never tray will licht of alayu hide the par hide the seir. According to Rabbi Yehuda, have to, and you won't get mixed up because you'll put a label. Rabbi Yehuda is not relying on that label. Rabbi Yehuda less like Siva. So you have proof that Rabbi Yehuda holds you cannot rely on labels. In the same way, you cannot rely on labels on Yom Kippur and the Beis Hamikdash for the Kohen to know which is the Dam Par and which is the Dam Seir, because they don't read labels and it's going to get mixed up. So too, when you have the pushkis, you couldn't have a pushka for the birds of Chayv because we're afraid the Kohanim won't read instructions and they'll take the wrong pushka for the wrong application. Afraid to Gemara may say. We're going to get a reminder of our Gemara, we'll get a chazara of our Gemara Shkolim that we learned recently. There were 13 pushkas in the Beis Hamikdash. And they were called shofars because they were thin at the top and they got wider at the bottom so no one can stick their hand in to take money out. But Yikosav Alein, and the 13 pushkas were labeled as follows. Taklin Chaditin, the new Shkolim of this year. The Taklin Atikin, the person who didn't put in Shkolim last year, could now pay back. Now we know, of course, from the Taklin Chayatin, they took from those coins to buy karbonis with. The Taklin Aktikin, you can't buy karbonis anymore with them. They were used for fixing the roads and for communal needs. The Keenan, and then they were birds.
Infrastructure.
Thank you. That was the word. The Keenan and birds of Nadava. The guys Le'oila and other birds of Nadava. The Gemara is going to explain shortly what these two groups of birds of Nadava was. The Eitzim, and someone who wanted to give a carbon of Eitzim, he would put money into the Eitzim, Pushka, Ulavoina, and if he wanted to give Lavoina, he put money into that box, Vizov Kapiris, and if he wanted to give gold to form Kalim, it doesn't mean the Kapiris of the cover of the Urin, right? It means Kalim, which are referred to as Kapiris, and then Vishisha the Nadava. And then there were 6 pushkas that were just for Nadavas, animals of Nadavas. And the Brisa elaborates on it. Taklin Chadatin, Elush Golem shall call Shana B'Shana. If you're paying this year's taxes, you put it into there. Taklin Atikin was Mishal Ishakal Ishtakit. If you never paid your taxes from last year, Yishkar L'Shana Haba. You can pay this year, but you have to put it into the proper receptacle that's going to be used for infrastructure. Keenan, what type of birds do we mean by Keenan? Hein Toirin, they're older Toirin that are to be brought for the Davas Oila. Goizle Oila, those are Hein B'nei Oila. Those are to buy small doves which was a different type of carbon oil, but they're both birds and they're both in doves. But the chulin oilos, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So there's 13 pushkas, and no one got mixed up. So how could you say that Rabbi Yehuda holds kohanim get mixed up, even if it's labeled? There were 13 pushkas all labeled, and we weren't worried that they would get mixed up. So clearly, you don't have to worry about it. So Ibazoi, you cannot explain Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there were no pushka for kinei chayva. You can't say it's because you would get mixed up, because clearly you don't get mixed up. And you can't explain in our Mishnah why there's only one stand, because you'll get mixed up, because you see clearly Rabbi Yehuda held there were 13 pushkas and no one got mixed up. Just as on the side, there were 6 pushkas l'nedava. Why did you need 6? So those who learned, you needed a lot of them. But Rashi explained the reason why you needed 6, because every week there were 6 families of kahuna that would work in the Beis Hamikdash. And on Shabbos, they all worked together. So the 6 pushkas for Nedava, the first one, it would be for the family that works on Sunday, and the second one would be for the family that works on Monday, and so on and so forth. That's why it was split into 6 things. So I'll call upon them. We're back to the drawing board. You can't explain Rabbi Yehuda that men don't read directions, and that's why you can't have kinei chayva, and that's put on our Mishnah, because clearly, even with 13 different pushkas, Rabbi Yehuda wasn't concerned about a mix-up. So Zokt Gemara, Ki Asher Avdimi Amar, when Avdimi came, he said that Ami b'Marava, in Marava they explained the Shida of Rabbi Yehuda, who held that they didn't have a special pushka for kinei chayva, was Gzer Mishum Chatos Shemesu Baileha. We're afraid that if people just put money into the pushka, well, what if one of these bringers of the karbanis, if it's a Ledes or if it's a Zov, what if he dies? He leaves money in the pushka and he dies. So now one of these karbanis are going to be puzzled, and you don't know which one it is. So it's going to mess everybody up. So because of that, you got to bring your own karbanis of chi of life. In fact, tomorrow, do we ever worry that if somebody donated a carbon while he was alive, that he would have died before the carbon was brought? We're not worried about that. Because what now we learned, let's say someone sent a carbon chatos from very far away. It could have taken weeks or months until his shliach actually brought the animal to the Beis Hamikdash itself. Now the question is, this guy might have died. They didn't have communications in those days, so there's no way the person who's presenting this animal to the Beis Hamikdash, there's no way he could know if the person who sent him is still alive. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says, we can assume that the fellow is still alive and you can be makabit. So, how could you tell me that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you cannot have a pushka with carbonates of chayv because you're afraid somebody who puts the money in will die afterwards? We're not worried that someone's going to die afterwards. Zok Gemara, no, we're not. It's not that we're worried someone's going to die. What if we find out for sure we know somebody died? Imagine you have a situation where there's a pushka full of money, and a guy comes to the Beis Hamikdash and says, last week I put money in for my wife, and you know what? She died. And now you have a huge pushka full of thousands of dollars representing hundreds of karbanis, and one of them is puzzle. So now we got to throw everything out. That would be a disaster. So because of that, since we're concerned if someone actually dies vadai, it would mess everybody up. So because of that, everyone has to bring their carbon person. Frag the Gemara, what's the big deal? If we know someone died, that out of these hundreds of batches of money, one of them is not kosher, so v'niver abra zuzeh, take out any set of 4 zuzim, v'nishti b'maya, and destroy that, put that into Yam HaMelech and destroy it. And we'll say that that was the one who belonged to the person who died. And let's let all the other ones be brought as karbanis. So Gemara, in order to say that, you require brera. Because who said that the one that you pick is the one that person put in? Maybe it's a different one. Only if you rely on the concept of brera would you be able to say that. And Rabbi Yehuda Leslie brera, Rabbi Yehuda does not have a hold of brera. How do you know that? Minolan, how do you know that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a brera? I think we should stop here because, as you can see, tomorrow's daf is very, very small, and we will leave it for tomorrow. It's late enough, so we can probably stop now, And the Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue tomorrow. B'ezras Hashem Yisborach. Tomorrow is a very chashuv yahrzeit, which is tonight already. 3 of the Asar Harugei Malchus, their yahrzeit is tonight. So I'll mention tomorrow. I'll look it up. I'll remember who they are.
Go ahead.
Everybody have a good tavach.
Sure.
And all of the yahrzeit and the Shom